It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't war. But on a quiet December morning in 1917, the sky above Halifax turned white, and the world stopped breathing. Fishermen waved to the French freighter, drifting peacefully through the harbor. The Mont Blanc carried barrels stacked high, metal glinting under frost, a secret no one knew. Children chased gulls along the pier, mothers leaned from windows calling their sons to breakfast. It was an ordinary morning, the kind that slips through memory until it's gone. No one noticed the second ship cutting across its path, engines roaring too late. The crews shouted, hands waving frantically, but the tide didn't listen. A young dockworker paused to light a cigarette. The wind shifted. He looked up, two ships kissing metal to metal, a shower of sparks in slow motion. For one fragile second, nothing moved. The sea was calm, the air sharp, too clean. Then came the light, blinding, absolute, brighter than the sun, louder than time. And in that instant, Halifax ceased to exist. Before the fire, Halifax was a song of small routines, quiet, unhurried, content. At dawn, dock bells echoed across the water, their metallic rhythm calling men to the harbor. Steam rose from ships moored along the wharf, mingling with the smell of salt and coal. Bakers opened their shutters, warm loaves filling the cold air with comfort. In narrow streets, milkmen whistled, boots tapping in time with the heartbeat of a city that trusted tomorrow would come. In the schoolhouse, Miss O'Leary dusted her sleeves and smiled at her students' chatter. Hands clean, books open, she said, as sunlight filtered through frosted windows. Nearby, a nurse named Anna paused by her window to seal a letter. "I'll be waiting by the harbor when you return." She kissed the envelope, unaware that it would be found days later beneath ash. Down by the docks, Samuel, a boy of 10, carved his initials into a wooden frame while his sister counted ships passing in the fog. When winter ends, he promised, "I'll take you sailing." She laughed, not knowing that winter would never really end for them. The harbor was alive, gulls circling, ropes creaking, laughter spilling between shouts of sailors. The sea shimmered like glass, and people believed it was their shield from the chaos overseas. The war existed only in newspapers and telegrams, never in their mornings. A soldier on leave leaned against a lamppost, lighting a cigarette. He exhaled slowly, smiling at the sound of church bells, soft, familiar, harmless. No one noticed the two ships aligning by fate, their hulls inching closer. No one sensed the air tightening. Sometimes peace sounds like ignorance, and that's what makes it so heartbreakingly beautiful. It began with something small, a tremor under the dock, so faint most mistook it for the tide brushing against the wooden beams. The gulls circling the harbor cried once and veered lower, their wings slicing through air that suddenly felt thick, heavy, charged. A cold fog rolled in from the Atlantic, dulling the city's colors, turning morning into an echo of twilight. Out on the water, two ships, the Mont Blanc and the IMO, moved steadily toward each other, engines rumbling through the mist. Both captains believed the other would yield. Both trusted the rules of the sea more than instinct. Flags waved in the wrong direction, signals lost to the shifting wind. On the hill, a radio operator adjusted his dials, brow furrowed. Static hissed and then sharpened, a thin, uneasy sound. "All clear," he reported, though something about the silence that followed made his chest tighten. By the docks, Samuel's mother wrung out a sheet, pausing when she caught a strange smell, sharp, chemical, unfamiliar. She looked up and saw a glint of sunlight flashing off a ship's hull, bright and sudden like fire caught in glass. At the schoolhouse, Miss O'Leary stopped mid-sentence as a deep metallic groan rolled across the harbor. The desks rattled. A pencil fell and hit the floor, a small sound, but it made every child look up. Far away, a sailor shouted. Another answered. Then came a whistle, high, urgent, slicing through fog too thick to see through. The ships were close now, their wakes crossing, engines reversing too late. The harbor held its breath. And still, the city moved, unaware that the next breath it took would be its last. A single flash split the sky. For one impossible second, the harbor became the sun, brighter than anything human eyes were meant to see. Shadows disappeared. Sound disappeared. Existence itself seemed to pause. Then the air caught fire. Every window in Halifax shattered at once, sending a rain of glass across streets that no longer had names. The roar came a heartbeat later, Not a sound but a force, tearing through air and flesh alike. The Mont Blanc was gone, vaporized, and in its place a wall of flame rolled outward faster than thought. Houses lifted from their foundations, roofs spiraled upward like leaves, and people vanished mid-stride. Samuel's mother was thrown to the ground, her laundry basket exploding into cinders. She reached for her daughter, fingers brushing the air as the heat swallowed the room. The walls folded inward, glowing white before they fell. Downtown, a soldier on leave was hurled across the street. His cigarette, still burning, floated briefly in the orange wind. The church bell rang once before the steeple gave way, collapsing into the square. A horse bolted through the fire, screaming, the sound piercing even through the roar, a sound no one would ever forget. The nurse who had written her letter woke beneath what used to be a hospital, her lungs full of dust and blood. Around her, cries rose and fell, human voices breaking into whispers as smoke filled the gaps where air used to be. A 1-ton anchor flew nearly 2 miles inland. Train cars melted where they stood. Trees snapped in half as the shockwave passed. The harbor boiled. The sea itself recoiled, dragging wreckage and bodies into its retreat. Then, nothing, no wind. No fire. Only a suspended quiet, where dust fell like snow over the ruins of a city that no longer breathed. For a moment, it was beautiful. And in that silence, Halifax understood. When the noise returned, it came as screams, thousands of them, blending into one unending note of grief. Firefighters stumbled through streets they couldn't recognize. Mothers searched for voices that would never answer. The air burned their throats, light stabbed their eyes. But still they moved, because stopping meant dying. Above it all, a column of smoke rose 20,000 feet high, a black scar twisting into the sky, visible for miles. Ships at sea thought the city had been bombed. The explosion was heard 500 kilometers away. But no one truly heard it the same way. For some, it was the voice of God. For others, the end of faith. For all, it was the sound of innocence breaking. And somewhere beneath the ash, in what used to be a small wooden house by the docks, Samuel's carved initials on the window frame remained untouched, unburned, the last fragile proof that once, there had been a world worth remembering. They said it was the loudest sound ever heard on Earth. But what came after was worse, the silence. The fire had faded, but the air still trembled, carrying a weight that words could never hold. The streets had no edges anymore, only the faint outlines of what once was, doorways, fences, a child's swing half buried in ash. The harbor steamed like an open wound, the water bubbling where the heat of the blast refused to die. A woman crawled through gray dust, her voice breaking as she called names that never answered. A single shoe lay in the middle of the street, blackened but whole, its owner gone. Nearby, a man sat beside the splintered remains of his home, clutching a burned photograph. The faces inside were smiling, untouched by fire. He whispered to them as if they might still hear. Beneath a collapsed roof, the nurse awoke to a beam of cold light cutting through the wreckage. She couldn't move. She didn't cry. She only listened. Beneath the rubble, between the settling stones, she could still hear it. The heartbeat of the city, faint, uneven, still human. Then came the snow, white flakes drifted through smoke, falling over bodies and ruins alike. It softened everything: guilt, sorrow, memory, as though the world wanted to forget before it froze. At dawn, the soldiers arrived. They moved slowly, boots crunching over glass and ice. None spoke. They didn't have to. The silence spoke for them. And somewhere near the harbor, a cracked bell began to ring, faint, trembling, alive. In that single fragile note, Halifax remembered it was still here. Morning came slowly, unsure if it should. The smoke had cleared, but the silence stayed. Halifax was no longer a city, it was a memory trying to remember itself. People emerged from the ruins with faces gray from ash, eyes too tired to cry. They began to dig, not for gold, not for meaning, but for each other. Hands that once built ships now lifted stones, searching for a heartbeat, a breath, any sign that someone was still alive. The soldiers shared their rations. The nurses tore their own sleeves for bandages. Strangers became family in the space where the world had ended. No one spoke of what was lost. They simply kept moving, because stopping meant remembering. By nightfall, the harbor glowed again, not from fire this time, but from lanterns placed beside the dead. Each flame a name, each light a promise. The sea that had wounded them now reflected their grief in trembling gold. Across the ocean, word reached Boston. Within hours, doctors, food, and supplies were on trains heading north. No politics, no questions, just help. It was the kind of compassion that doesn't make headlines but saves generations. Weeks later, snow covered the ruins, soft and white, as if the sky was trying to forgive. Children built snowmen where houses once stood. Laughter returned, faint but real proof that even broken voices could find harmony again. In December, when the first Christmas tree arrived from Boston, people gathered by the harbor. They lit the candles one by one. For a moment, the reflections danced across the water, the same water that had betrayed them, now holding them gently again. Halifax rebuilt itself, not from strength, but from kindness. The city learned that survival isn't the opposite of loss, it's what grows from it. And every year since, that tree still travels from Boston to Halifax, a living memory between two cities, a bridge built from empathy. It wasn't the sea that destroyed Halifax. It was the moment we stopped listening. But in the quiet that followed, we began to hear again, and that's how the story continues.
We stopped listening.